The moment I placed the DNA test results on my aunt's mahogany desk, her face went from smug satisfaction to pure terror. 23 years of lies crumbled in seconds. My name is Emma, and this is my hidden story. Until 6 months ago, I believed I was nobody special. Just another struggling waitress in Chicago, living paycheck to paycheck. Growing up, I'd always felt like an outsider in my own family. But I never imagined the real reason was because they weren't my family at all. It started with a stupid birthday gift. My roommate Lisa thought those Ancestry DNA kits were fun, so she got me one for my 28th birthday. I laughed it off, spat in the tube, and forgot about it. 6 weeks later, the email that changed everything arrived while I was wiping down tables at the diner. Your results are ready. I expected to see boring percentages, maybe some Irish, definitely some German like Aunt Patricia always bragged about. Instead, I found myself staring at a name under close family match that made my hands shake. Robert Sinclair. The Robert Sinclair, the tech billionaire who died in a plane crash when I was 5. My heart hammered as I clicked through the details. Parent-child relationship. 99.9% certainty. The coffee pot in my hand crashed to the floor, but I barely noticed the hot liquid splashing my legs. Growing up, Aunt Patricia had one story she never tired of telling. How she'd taken me in after my parents, her sister and brother-in-law, died in a car accident. She was the hero who saved her orphaned niece from foster care, the martyr who sacrificed her freedom to raise her sister's child. Every birthday, every holiday, every family gathering, she found a way to remind me how grateful I should be. You'd be in the system if it wasn't for me, Emma. Remember that. I must have heard those words 1,000 times. They shaped everything about me. The way I kept my head down, never asked for too much, always said thank you even when she forgot my birthday or gave my cousins expensive gifts while I got hand-me-downs. But now, staring at that DNA match, none of it made sense. Robert Sinclair had no connection to our family. I'd Googled him countless times over the years, fascinated by his rags-to-riches story, his innovations, his tragic death. Not once had Aunt Patricia mentioned knowing him. I called in sick for the rest of my shift and spent the next 3 days in an internet rabbit hole. Robert Sinclair had been married once, briefly, to a woman named Diana Chen. They'd had a daughter, Rose, who supposedly died with him in the crash. But the more I dug, the stranger it got. No death certificate for Rose Sinclair, no burial records, just nothing. My hands trembled as I found a photo from a tech conference, dated just months before the crash. Robert Sinclair smiling broadly, holding a little girl with wild curly hair and his exact same crooked smile. The caption read, "Tech innovator Robert Sinclair with daughter Rose, age 4. I ran to the bathroom and stared at my reflection. Same wild curls, though I'd been straightening them for years because Aunt Patricia said they looked messy. Same crooked smile that she always said made me look simple. Same green eyes that nobody else in the family had. The room spun. I gripped the sink and tried to breathe through the panic clawing at my chest. If I was Rose Sinclair, then who was Emma Martinez? And why had Aunt Patricia been lying to me my entire life? I knew I needed help, but who could I trust? My cousin Derek had always been decent to me, despite his mother's obvious favoritism. He was a paralegal now, working at a firm downtown. Maybe he could point me in the right direction without asking too many questions. But when I called him, his voice sounded strange, nervous. He kept asking why I wanted to know about inheritance law, if everything was okay, if I'd talked to his mom recently. When I pressed, he finally broke. "Emma, please, just leave it alone. You don't understand what you're messing with." The fear in his voice sent chills down my spine. This wasn't about some small family secret. This was bigger, much bigger. I hired a private investigator with money I couldn't afford to spend. James Morrison came recommended by a regular at the diner, whose ex had hidden assets during their divorce. He was expensive, thorough, and discreet. Within 2 weeks, he had answers that made me wish I'd never opened that DNA kit. Rose Sinclair hadn't died in that plane crash. She'd been in San Francisco with her nanny the day her father's private jet went down. As his only heir, she stood to inherit everything, an estate worth over $300 million at the time. But somehow, 5-year-old Rose Sinclair vanished from a hospital in San Francisco, and 5-year-old Emma Martinez appeared in Chicago, in the care of Patricia Martinez, a woman with gambling debts that mysteriously disappeared right around the same time. The investigator laid out document after document: forged death certificates, falsified adoption papers, bank transfers from offshore accounts, a paper trail that Patricia had probably thought was buried forever, until technology caught up with her crimes. But the worst part was the letter. Hidden in the files was a copy of Robert Sinclair's will, with a handwritten edition made just days before his death. If anything happened to him, Rose was to be cared for by her godmother, Diana Chen's college roommate, a woman named Patricia Martinez. He'd trusted her. He'd literally put his daughter's life in her hands. And she'd sold me out for money. The investigator warned me to be careful. Patricia Martinez had connections, he said, the kind of people who made problems disappear. But I was past careful. I was past afraid. I was furious. I spent another month building my case: DNA test results, the investigator's findings, photos comparing young Rose to young Emma, financial records showing Patricia's sudden wealth after my supposed parents' death. I even tracked down the nanny who'd been with Rose in San Francisco. Now in her 70s and living in Florida, she cried when I called her. She'd always wondered what happened to that sweet little girl who loved dinosaurs and strawberry ice cream. Still love both, I told her through my own tears. I made copies of everything, sent packets to 3 different lawyers with instructions to open them if anything happened to me, set up a meeting with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and then, on a cold Tuesday morning, I walked into the house I'd grown up in for the last time. Patricia was in her office, the one I'd never been allowed to enter as a child. She looked up when I walked in, irritation flashing across her face before settling into her usual mask of condescension. She started to speak, probably to remind me about knocking, but stopped when she saw the manila folder in my hands. Something in my expression must have warned her. She went very still, like a predator sensing danger. I didn't say anything, just walked to her desk and placed the DNA results on top of her morning coffee, watched the color drain from her face as she read them, watched her hands start to shake. How? The word came out as barely a whisper. I laid out the other documents one by one: the investigator's report, the will, the photos, the financial records. With each piece of paper, she seemed to shrink into her leather chair. By the time I placed the FBI appointment confirmation on top of the pile, she looked like she'd aged 20 years. She tried to speak several times, started sentences about doing what was best for me, about protecting me, about how complicated everything was. But the words died in her throat when she met my eyes. She must have seen it there, that I knew everything, every lie, every theft, every year of my life she'd stolen. The money's gone. She finally managed to say it, her voice flat. Most of it, anyway. Bad investments, the market crash in 2008, the houses, the cars, Derek's education, Melissa's wedding. She'd spent my inheritance on her children, on herself, on maintaining the image of a successful businesswoman while I worked double shifts to pay for community college, while I wore thrift store clothes and skipped meals to make rent, while I believed I should be grateful for the crumbs of affection she occasionally threw my way. The rage that filled me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. White hot and pure, it burned through years of trained submission, of keeping quiet, of being grateful. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to tear apart this office built with my father's money. Instead, I leaned across the desk until we were inches apart. She flinched back, and I saw real fear in her eyes for the first time in my life. You have 48 hours to transfer whatever's left to my account. Every penny. Then you're going to write a full confession. Names, dates, amounts, everything. If you miss the deadline or if you leave anything out, the FBI gets everything. If anything happens to me, the FBI gets everything. If you ever contact me again, the FBI gets everything. She nodded frantically, mascara running down her cheeks. The powerful woman who'd controlled my entire life reduced to a sobbing mess by a few pieces of paper and the truth. I turned to leave, then stopped. There was one more thing I needed to know. My nanny, Maria, the woman who was with me in San Francisco. Did you Patricia shook her head violently. She's alive. I paid her to disappear. She went back to Mexico. I swear I never hurt anyone. I just wanted a better life for my kids by stealing mine. But I didn't say it. I was done talking to her. I walked out of that house with my head high, past the family photos where I was always slightly apart from the rest, past the rooms I'd cleaned while her children played, past 23 years of lies. The money she transferred was barely a tenth of what I should have inherited. $60,000 in change, probably all she could access without her husband noticing. It wasn't justice, not really. But it was enough to hire a real lawyer, enough to start the process of reclaiming my name, my identity, my father's legacy. The FBI took the case, though they warned me it could take years to resolve. Patricia was charged with kidnapping, identity theft, and fraud. Her husband left her. Derek and Melissa cut contact with her completely. Derek even reached out to apologize, said he'd suspected something was wrong for years, but had been too afraid to dig deeper. I didn't go back to Emma Martinez. That person had never really existed, but I didn't quite feel like Rose Sinclair either. She was a 5-year-old who loved her daddy and had been excited about starting kindergarten. I settled on Rose Emma Chen Sinclair, honoring both the mother I'd never known and the identity I'd lived with for over 2 decades. The tech community embraced me with open arms. My father had been beloved, and his old colleagues lined up to help his daughter. I learned he'd been working on education software when he died, programs to help kids from low-income families access the same learning tools as wealthy students. His company had shelved the project after his death, but I had access to his notes now. His vision. It felt like destiny. I used Patricia's $60,000 as seed money, leveraged my story for publicity, and found investors who'd loved my father. Within a year, Sinclair Education Tech was up and running, providing free learning apps to schools in underserved communities. It felt like completing something he'd started, like the years between 5 and 28 were just a detour. Patricia took a plea deal, 8 years in minimum security, out in 5 with good behavior. I could have pushed for more, but I found I didn't care about revenge anymore. She'd already lost everything that mattered to her, her family, her reputation, her freedom. And I'd gained more than money. I'd gained myself. Sometimes I dream about the life I should have had. Growing up in San Francisco, maybe. Going to Stanford like my father. Having his guidance as I navigated the tech world. But then I think about Maria, my old nanny, who I flew in from Mexico for my company's launch party. I think about the kids using our apps, getting chances they wouldn't have had otherwise. I think about the strength I found in that diner, working for tips and still managing to hope for something better. Patricia stole my inheritance, but she couldn't steal the part of my father that lived in my DNA, the innovation, the drive, the desire to make the world a little better. She couldn't steal my mother's resilience or her sense of justice. Those were coded in my cells, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The night before my first board meeting as CEO of Sinclair Education Tech, I stood in my new apartment, nothing fancy but mine, and raised a glass of wine to the photo I'd found of my parents. Young, brilliant, in love, with their whole lives ahead of them. Lives cut short but not erased, not forgotten. I'd spent 23 years as nobody special. Turns out, I'd been somebody all along. I just needed to find the proof. And sometimes, proof comes in the most unexpected ways. A birthday gift, a DNA test, a truth too big to stay buried forever. My name is Rose Emma Chen Sinclair. I am my father's daughter. And I have work to do.